today's event. The Arms Control Association was established in 1971 by several of the men who we heard about in the previous panel, who were part of the Limited Test Ban Treaty and Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty efforts. And ACA, along with many of our colleague organizations who are here today, including Women's Action for New Directions and Physicians for Social Responsibility, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and others, have been working for decades to bring about a halt to nuclear testing. And I want to join Paul Walker in thanking our co-organizers and hosts, the Embassy of Kazakhstan, and of course Paul and Global Greens USA for pulling all this together. Before we begin with our second panel on the role and future of the Test Ban Treaty, we're just going to take a moment to see a video. It's about 5 minutes long that describes the Atom Project that was established to highlight the dangers of nuclear testing, particularly in Kazakhstan, but as I'll say in a few minutes, those dangers extend far beyond the Semipalatinsk test zone in Kazakhstan. So let's just take a look at this.
On August 29, 1949, the former Soviet Union detonated what would be the first of more than 450 nuclear warheads at their new testing site in eastern Kazakhstan. Just 100 miles away, the people in the industrial city of Semipalatinsk watched as the sky lit up and radiation filled the air. Today, that city is called Semi. It has been more than 20 years since a nuclear bomb was tested here, but for the people of Semi, nuclear testing is not a thing of the past. Every day, many residents in Semi live with a legacy of those tests. For these people, the consequences of nuclear testing, the devastating effects of nuclear radiation, are clear. Over the 4 decades of nuclear tests, approximately 1.5 million people in the region were affected. Today, 1 in 20 children is born with deformities. The cancer rate is 50% higher here than elsewhere in the country. Many of the population die before reaching 60. Not many of the people who lived in Semi throughout the tests are alive today to tell their stories, but the lives of their children and grandchildren tell their own cautionary tale. Governments around the world know with certainty that the side effects of nuclear weapons and testing are illness, unending environmental devastation, and death. The people of Semi, the Bikini Atoll, the Marshall Islands, Nagasaki and Hiroshima have lived it. Some countries, such as Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus and South Africa, have already eliminated their nuclear weapons or abandoned their nuclear weapons programs. Through the decisions of its president, Nazarbayev, Kazakhstan has also shut down the infamous Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. Yet other countries could have done much more to help create a nuclear-safe world. The United Nations is working to build national and global security without nuclear weapons, establish regional nuclear weapons-free zones, put an end to testing, and ultimately free the world of its nuclear arsenal. One of the most concrete steps towards achieving this goal would be pushing through the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. The very existence and availability of weapons-grade fissile material in nuclear states such as North Korea, as well as the appeal of nuclear devices as the ultimate weapon, increase the risk of global nuclear terrorism. If we stop nuclear weapons testing and secure all fissile material, then we also substantially reduce the threat of nuclear terrorism. The people of Semi, Nevada, and the Marshall Islands didn't know they'd become the victims of nuclear radiation. But if you're watching this, you now know that their fate could be your own. But together we have the power to stop nuclear weapons testing. Today we have the power to create a nuclear-safe world. By joining together, we can let the people all over the world affected by nuclear weapons testing know we heard their story. Make your mark by telling the world leaders that you want to live in a nuclear-safe world. Go to theatomproject.org and sign the petition. Let's act now and stop nuclear weapons testing.
All right. Well, as we heard in the previous panel, the United States and Great Britain and the Soviet Union came close, but it did not complete the effort for a comprehensive test ban. As successful as the limited test ban treaty was in stopping the most visible and dangerous aspect of the arms race, the hundreds of open air explosions that spewed dangerous levels of radioactive contamination at the test sites and far beyond that caused this kind of damage, was the result. And one thing that's important to note is that the same kind of citizen movement that we're hearing about with the Atom Project, that did occur in the lead up to the limited test ban treaty. The organization I used to work for many years ago, the Physicians for Social Responsibility, along with other citizen activists, were a critical part of the efforts to bring about an end to testing in the late 50s and 60s, and was one of the reasons why, in my view, John F. Kennedy's efforts were so strong in terms of trying to end testing. And one thing to note also is that though the damage immediately around the test sites, Semipalatinsk, Nevada, and elsewhere, has been extremely great. The damage caused by that radiation, even after the limited test ban treaty, has been tremendous also. According to a 1992 calculation by experts from the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research and the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, there have been between 320,000 and 650,000 additional cancer fatalities worldwide through the year 2000 as a result of global nuclear fallout. And so our knowledge about the harm of nuclear testing is still not complete, and the job of ending testing is not complete. The next best chance for the test ban treaty, comprehensive test ban treaty, would not come for another 3 decades after the ratification of the limited test ban treaty on September 24th, 1963, and its entry into force weeks later. As we heard already, in 1989, Kazakh people rose up to call for an end to further Soviet testing in their homelands. And here in the United States, about a year later, there was a renewed movement to push the United States Congress to introduce legislation to match the Soviet moratorium that was announced in 1991 by Mikhail Gorbachev in response to that citizen movement in Kazakhstan. And 4 years later, multilateral negotiations on the CTBT were finally concluded. And so this panel is going to look at the test ban treaty, the issues relating to the U.S. ratification issue, the technical issues, some of the political issues, and we're also going to hear again about some of the reasons why we need to move ahead to close the door on testing. And I would just note that we're talking about this today because the test ban treaty here in Washington, because U.S. and Chinese ratification is critical to moving forward towards formal entry into force. They are among the few holdout states that must ratify in order to bring the treaty into force. President Obama, as we heard before from the ambassador at the top, has repeatedly expressed his support for U.S. ratification of the CTBT. In 2009, he said that he would immediately and aggressively pursue U.S. ratification. And again, in June, President Obama said, "We will work to build support in the United States to ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty." There's a lot of work to be done. That pledge is important, but there's much more work to be done in order to move forward to develop a concrete plan of action to pursue the steps necessary to win support in the Senate. My organization and many others believe that such an effort will take time. The results may not be clear anytime soon, but to move forward, we can and must begin that effort, and it's important for the White House to name a coordinator to help lead that effort, and to use some of the tools that the President now has to help inform the Senate about the key technical issues regarding the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. And this panel is going to take a look at some of those issues. We are very happy to have with us here today Ambassador Linton Brooks, who was a member of the National Academy of Sciences panel on technical issues related to the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which issued its report in March. And Linton is going to describe to us the findings of the panel, which address some of the key issues that were at the center of the previous debate in the Senate in October 1999, when the treaty was rejected by the Senate. We're also going to be hearing from others on the panel. We're going to be hearing from Ambassador Roman Vasilenko. He serves as Ambassador at Large for the Foreign Ministry of Kazakhstan, and he has been central to the Atom Project's efforts. He will be speaking second and describing his views about how we can move forward with Test Ban Treaty entry into force, as well as other issues. And we'll also be hearing from Karapek Kuyakov, who's the Honorary Atom Project Ambassador, third. And then at about 3:25, we'll be hearing from Anita Fried, who is Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Strategic Policy at the U.S. Department of State, on the Obama administration's perspective on the legacy of the LTBT and the value of the CTBT. So with that transition and introduction, I want to welcome Ambassador Linton Brooks to begin outlining the results of the National Academy study. Thank you, Linton.
Thank you. At the request of the United States government, particularly the Vice President's office and the State Department, the National Academies undertook a technical study. That's the first thing you have to understand. There are some important issues. Will ratification help nonproliferation? If we ratify, can others be brought to? That I am going to say absolutely nothing about, because that's not what we were tasked to do. So we'll talk about technical issues. That's the first thing you need to keep in mind. Second thing you need to keep in mind is that the Academy's process is thorough but majestically slow, and the government's review process is equally. So I'm not going to talk at all about money. There's a good deal in the report about spending. It's based on the budget situation in 2010 and is now largely of historical interest. The report was done in a classified version. You're just going to have to take my word for it that if you had the classified version, it would not be inconsistent with anything I am saying. The recommendations are, in almost all cases, verbatim the same in the two versions. The classified version has a good deal more about U.S. unilateral capabilities. We got asked to look basically at four questions. Can we maintain the U.S. stockpile without nuclear testing? How well can we detect, locate, and identify nuclear explosions? what do we need to do to make the answers to those first two questions continue good in the future? That's the money part, which I'm not going to talk about. And what could be done under the CTBT? What kind of evasion could happen, and would it matter? Maintaining the stockpile was most straightforward. It's most straightforward because compared to the last look, we now have substantial more experience with a program called stockpile stewardship. And that has led to systematic capture of past information, major improvements in computing to manipulate the data, major construction of facilities to look at individual aspects of the physics that we used to look at in explosions. And the conclusion of the committee was, quote, provided that sufficient resources and a national commitment to stockpile stewardship are in place, the committee judges the United States has the technical capabilities to maintain a safe, secure, and reliable stockpile into the foreseeable future without nuclear explosion testing. That judgment was fairly straightforward, good deal of detail in it. The adequate resources mostly means a program of surveillance, which has not always fared as well in the budget process as we thought it should. Second question we looked at was monitoring. Monitoring primarily underground, but also underwater, atmosphere, and space. And here too, the committee drew on the substantial improvements since the last time a National Academy panel looked at this, which was a report that came out in 2002, but probably reflects the situation around 2000. The majority of the international monitoring system is completed, so instead of talking about what will be, we're talking about what is. We've improved our xenon radionuclide detection capabilities. We've implemented regional seismic detections, and as a result, we're seeing more and more international capability. Now, the report is very general on U.S. unilateral capability. I think it would not be unfair to say that most observers believe that the United States' national technical means are at least as good as the international capability. So, as you see that improvement in monitoring internationally, it's fair to assume that it's been matched by internal effort. The report spent much of its technical effort on seismology. Seismology is the most effective technology for detecting underground explosions. Unlike past efforts, we had a separate panel of distinguished seismologists. This will become important for one aspect when we talk a little bit about evasion. And the basic conclusion is that threshold levels for detection are well below 1 kiloton worldwide, and in Asia, Europe, and North Africa, which are the places that most people are most concerned about detecting, the detection thresholds are substantially better, down to 0.09 to 0.2 kilotons, so 90 to 200 tons. We also looked at on-site inspection and concluded, as others have, that on-site inspection, if conducted without hindrance, and if there was sufficient precision and location, would have a high likelihood of detecting evidence of an explosion with a yield greater than 100 tons. So what that suggests to you is that we concluded that there's a very strong probability of detection and characterization of nuclear tests. But that assumes no evasion. So what did we look at on evasion? First, we concluded that if you wanted to evade, what The most obvious way is simply to test at very low levels. All of these things scale down so that they're hard to detect at low level. Now, it's important here to distinguish between our confidence in detecting something and an evader's confidence that we wouldn't. So you don't look and say, we have a 90% confidence. That's important for us, for building our system. But the evader has to be much more certain that we won't detect. And so typically when you see numbers in our report that there's a 90% probability we'll detect something, you should reduce that by about 3 and say that that's a 10% probability. Would someone take a 10% risk of non-detection? There are 2 scenarios that have floated around about evasion. One is mine masking. You're doing things in a mine, and when the right seismic event happens, then you take advantage of that to hide a nuclear test. We concluded that for a variety of technical reasons, that's a much less interesting scenario than it was thought to be 10 or 12 years ago. Cavity decoupling, of which you will hear a great deal in the press, says this: if you take a relatively small device and you put it in a large cavity of the correct geological conditions, that you can decouple. This is based on 2.5 tests from a very long time ago and a whole bunch of extrapolation. And it is a increasingly challenging scenario with higher yields. So when you see things in the press that you can decouple by a factor of 70, that doesn't mean somebody can go out and detect a 70 kilo or conduct a 70 kiloton test and have it undetected. There's an extensive amount of information in the report for those of you seismologically inclined to do this. But we think that, or we concluded that these efforts are credible at most for a few hundred tons at well-monitored explosions. And so we concluded that the 2 states that could there are 3 countries that could probably pull off this kind of complex evasion scenario. One's the United States, one's the Russian Federation, one's the People's Republic of China. But for both China and Russia, we concluded that anything they could gain by that wouldn't add significantly to the very robust and complex stockpile they have. So basically, the people who are capable of cheating already have the stuff they could gain from cheating. The people who don't have that stuff are less capable of cheating. There was one subset of this, which is what's called a hydronuclear explosion. There's a debate in the CTBT about the absence of a definition of a nuclear test. We do not engage on the question of whether that's good treaty making or bad treaty making. We do, however, engage at some length on saying we take all the definitions people think they use, and we can't find anything that a state could do under one but not the other. So technically, we could not want to be very precise. Doesn't mean there's not something there. Simply means we could not identify anything where these very low yield tests, exactly how you define them, makes any difference. It is fair to note, however, the Russian Federation appears to place much more value on hydronuclear, these very low yield, but under our interpretation of the treaty, actual itty-bitty nuclear tests, that the Russian Federation appears to place much more value on those tests, than we do. We don't fully understand why. Our important conclusion, therefore, was we could not identify a potential threat that could arise through undetected nuclear explosion testing that would require the United States to return to nuclear explosion testing. The only thing that we could identify as a possible reason for returning to testing was the need to develop some fundamentally new type of weapon. And there, sort of by definition, you don't know whether you believe you can do it without testing. And we know that that is what the Supreme National Interest Clause appears to be intended for.
Thank you very much, Linton. We're now going to hear from Roman Vasilenko. He's been with the diplomatic service of Kazakhstan since 1996, and he is presently ambassador at large with the foreign ministry and has been in charge of various issues in very recent years, including the Atom Project. So over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, sir, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for your great interest in this panel and in this whole event. Needless to say, I'm deeply humbled to be able to speak to such a distinguished audience and with such distinguished panelists, as we heard on the first panel and as we heard just now from Ambassador Brooks. I think that between all of the people who have been engaged in nuclear disarmament or disarming the Semipalatinsk nuclear test ground testing site in Kazakhstan, we can easily get up to dozens of years or up to hundreds of years. I think there are so many people here who I know have been to Semipalatinsk or have dealt with nuclear disarmament issues for decades of their lives, and it will be hard for me to really say something which will be surprising to people who are gathered here today. However, I'll try. I would like to mention a few of the initiatives that our ambassador already mentioned, but I would like to a little bit expand on them. One is the initiative that Kazakhstan has launched and jointly with our 4 other neighbors in Central Asia, and signed the Central Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone. The significance of that treaty of SEME, signed in 2006, entered into force in 2009, is that it created the first nuclear weapon-free zone in completely located in Northern Hemisphere, and a zone that is bordering on 2 nuclear weapon states, Russia and China. And that it was a zone created in a place where there used to be nuclear weapons, which is Kazakhstan, obviously. Kazakhstan right now is a coordinator of the zone and working with the P5 to get the so-called negative guarantees for the zone, so that the zone is finally recognized internationally and is accepted by the nuclear 5 countries, by the 5 nuclear weapon states. However, we think that this was a major step forward, and as we all know, the whole of South Hemisphere is nuclear weapon free, and because of there has been at least 4 prior nuclear weapon free zones in before Semipalatinsk. So there is this process that by which countries declare their intention to free themselves from nuclear weapons and create legal frameworks for this. One other initiative I'd like to mention is the Universal Declaration of a Nuclear Weapon-Free World, which our president has proposed accepting through the United Nations. It has nothing to do with taking away the power from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or the yet to be entered into force CTBT. The idea behind this convention is to sort of jumpstart the rather stalled process on nuclear disarmament that we have seen over the past 17 years since the CTBT treaty was opened for signing. And to reconfirm through consensus that nuclear disarmament is indeed the ultimate goal of the mankind, and we all are prepared and we all are working towards that goal. And I know that our colleagues are now working at the United Nations in New York and in other locations to advance this vision. There has been at least several occasions, even in today's event, where we heard the word political courage or trust, when especially we heard this fascinating story of how the limited test ban treaty was signed and how it took a lot of behind the scenes negotiations and how lack of trust, of mutual trust, hindered these negotiations for quite some time. I think that I would completely agree with the assessment that, and with the phrase that, with the notion that it is indeed a matter of trust, and it is indeed a matter of confidence in each other, which the world unfortunately is lacking. And I was particularly impressed by Ambassador Brooks' recounting of the technical sides of why a test ban is possible for the United States. But I was also mindful of the fact that the panel looked at this whole issue from the technical side, obviously, and the panel looked at it from the side of how were the United States to respond if somebody violates this ban, basically, and how we can introduce the verification mechanisms. Of course, we all heard, we all remember the phrase "verify, trust, доверяй, но проверяй," and I think it's all relevant today. What was it in English? Trust but verify.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify. Yes. And it's important indeed, but I think the world is particularly lacking on the first part of that phrase, trust. There is plenty of verification mechanisms, and Kazakhstan is proud to be part of that mechanism through the hosting of 5 tracking stations of the CTBT. But trust is the hardest thing to come by, and once the world gets around, I know maybe it sounds utopian, maybe it sounds a little bit out of this world, but truly we have seen in many occasions where only through trust things can happen. And the other component of this success, as Daryl Kimball mentioned, is civic activism. We have seen over the past 17 years how hard it was to push for the ratification of the CTBT. However, as we all know, out of 183 signatories, 159 ratified, including 3 nuclear weapon states, Russia, the United Kingdom, and France. So basically these countries have shown that they are willing to go along with the agreement that they signed at the United Nations. And in order to really add, not put, but add human elements, and in order to remind of the horrific human consequences of nuclear weapons testing, Kazakhstan and our president launched the Atom Project. You have seen the video, and I'm not going to talk much about the project as we have described it in the video, and as we have the honorary ambassador of the Atom Project, Mr. Kuyukov. But I would say that already people from more than 100 countries signed the petition, the online petition, calling on the leaders of the world to abandon nuclear weapons, to make sure the CTBT enters into force, and to work towards a nuclear weapon-free future. It was amazing to hear from Mr. Naftali the history of the backstage negotiations before the limited test ban treaty was adopted. But it just as it was amazing to hear the behind-the-scenes talks during those times. it was amazing to realize that the leaders of the world indeed act from the best interests not only of their own countries but of humanity, and there is hope that they will listen to the people's voices, and we certainly hope so. And with this amazing verification mechanism in place, the United States and other countries that are the holdouts will show leadership and will make good on their promises. We certainly hope so. I will not take too much of your time, and I'd like to, if you don't mind, to turn over to my colleague. We came jointly to here. We first actually on this visit went to the United Nations General Assembly, and there we heard very positive response from many dozens of countries who spoke at the special informal meeting of the United Nations General Assembly devoted to the International Day Against Nuclear Tests, on what the United Nations as an organization and what the country members can do to move forward this process. But we're here with my good friend and colleague and distinguished person, Karibek Koyukov. He really, truly is an embodiment of the fact that mind can be stronger than the matter, and we're honored to have him with us. He is a long-time activist, and he can tell you directly what the people in Kazakhstan think about nuclear disarmament and the way forward. Thank you.
Здравствуйте. Я, во-первых, хотел бы сказать огромное спасибо всем организаторам сегодняшней этой встречи и всем вам за то, что вы вложили столько труда и сил в борьбе за безъядерный мир.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank all the organizers of today's event, and I also want to thank you for all that you have done to ensure the nuclear-free world for us.
Я приехал к вам с Казахстана, с маленького села Егин-Булак, которое находится в 100 километрах от бывшего Семипалатинского полигона.
I'm visiting you from Kazakhstan, from a small village, Егин-Булак, that is located about 100 kilometers from Semipalatinsk test site.
Я говорю с гордостью бывший Семипалатинский, потому что Казахстан одним из первых отказался от ядерного оружия, и я думаю, что это должно стать достойным примером для других стран.
And I'm very proud to say that I come from the former Semipalatinsk test site because I'm very proud that Kazakhstan became the first one to close it, and I think we're a good example for the others to follow in our footsteps.
Я часто спрашивала у родителей своих, вот у отца, у матери, почему вот так получилось, что я вот родился именно без рук. И когда я узнал, что, оказывается, до меня еще у меня был брат и сестра, которые не дожили до 6 месяцев.
And I have asked my parents, my mom and dad, often why was I born without arms, and then while I was asking, I actually found out that before there was a brother and a sister of mine that didn't live past their 6 months on this earth.
Отец часто рассказывал, когда, так как они были живыми очевидцами этих испытаний, он часто рассказывал, что по инструкции, вот, когда проводились очередные испытания, им надо было выходить на улицу и ложиться на землю и чем-то накрываться.
And my dad was an eyewitness of the testing, and so he was telling me how they were instructed when the testing was announced to come outside of their houses and to lay down on the ground and to cover themselves with something.
Ну, люди, которые жили около этого полигона, они видели вот это вот зрелище. Для них это было, конечно, как вот говорил отец, это было очень красивая, яркая вспышка.
But people who were living there also knew that it was an amazing sight to see. As my father was describing it, it was a beautiful flash that they could see from the explosion.
И они поднимались на гору, чтобы посмотреть вот на то, как земля сливалась с небом, и день сменялся ночью.
And so they would climb the hills in near the village, and they would watch how the sky and the ground would come one, and how the day will become night.
Когда они возвращались в свои дома, то они, конечно, видели, что там происходили такие вещи, когда вот на улице валялись дохлые курицы, бегали собаки, у которых полностью сошла шерсть.
And as they would go back home, in the streets they would see dead chickens, and they would see dogs without any hair.
И очень много было случаев, когда, да, рождались, пострадали не только люди, но и животные, когда рождались и телята с 2 головами или 6 ногами. Такие случаи очень много были у нас.
And not only people, but also animals suffered. We have seen calves born with 2 heads, 6 legs, and so this was also a very commonplace occurrence in our area.
Но я хотел бы просто вам сказать, что вот, поверьте мне, я сам давно занимаюсь вот этой деятельностью, и я очень много видел детей, семей, которые пострадали. Я очень много видел детей, которые не видели, которые не слышали, которые не могли говорить. И родители таких детей, они, конечно, стеснялись и прятали их в домах.
And I can tell you that I have been active in this area on the subject for a long time, and I have been involved with different people who suffered, families and children. I saw children who couldn't see, who couldn't hear, who couldn't talk, and their parents were very shy to show them to everybody, so they would hide them at home.
И очень тяжело было смотреть, например, вот, в глаза матери, когда она своего беспомощного ребенка, который не может двигаться, не может говорить, она сажала его просто в корыто, в котором она стирает белье, и выносит на улицу, и он весь день сидит в этом корыте.
And it was hard to look in the eyes of the mother who would have a baby who couldn't move, who couldn't talk, and she would just put him in a bucket that she would use for laundry and just put him outside so he can be outside this way.
И поражало, конечно, больше всего, что эти люди просто молча жили возле этого полигона в течение 40 лет. Шла тихая война, наверное, против моего народа.
And so the most amazing was that those people just quietly lived with it for 40 years, being next to the test site, not realizing that there was a quiet war being waged against them.
И, наверное, вот эти дети, эти страдания этих родителей и страдания этих детей, наверное, меня подтолкнуло вот на эту деятельность. И как вот здесь говорили, что я тоже начинал с антиарийного движения Невада-Семипалатинск. Вот я в Америке я уже здесь не первый раз. И когда мы были с Маршем мира сюда приезжали в 91 году, мы объехали очень много штатов и доехали до штата Невада. Я участвовал тоже в митинге и протесте возле вашего американского полигона, что находится в штате Невада.
And so probably for the suffering of those children and for the suffering of those parents, that I decided to dedicate my life to this movement. And I started some time ago participating in the movement that united Semipalatinsk and Nevada. This is not my first time in the United States. I have been here before, and I remember back in '91 I came here with a peace march, and we went all over the country, ending up in Nevada, where we organized the protest by the U.S test site.
Ну, конечно, вот эта вот работа, она отнимает много времени от моего творчества. И вот как вы видите сегодня вот мои работы, я хотел показать, наверное, вот изобразить тех людей, вот это мои последние работы, где вы видите портреты вот тех как раз людей, которым в жизни не повезло, которые не могут сказать громко о том, что им пришлось перенести. Поэтому вот, наверное, это мои картины, это крик души этих людей.
And so this takes a lot of time from my art. And here today you can see it. This is some of the latest portraits. Some people who have no voice to tell the world what happened to them, what they had to live through. And this is my way to show, and this is sort of their soul screaming through my art.
Также я был и в Токио, в Японии, я видел, вот, какую трагедию перенесла и Хиросима, Нагасаки. Все это, конечно, очень больно видеть и осознавать то, что радиация, она не различает ни какого цвета кожи, и мы все одинаковые. Мы все одинаково можем радоваться, мы все одинаково можем и плакать. Поэтому, мне кажется, мы должны все вместе противостоять этому.
And I've been to Japan. I have seen what hurt the radiation caused there in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And as you can see, radiation doesn't choose its victims, doesn't choose the color of the skin. We can all be happy, we can all cry together. But this is something that we can do together in order to stop it from happening.
Ну, так как в данный момент я являюсь почетным послом проекта «Атома», и я бы хотел тоже, да, попросить вас, чтобы вы подписали онлайн-петицию и могли даже рассказать всем, что про наш сайт, и что там можно отдать свой голос. И мы на этом сайте могли бы, наверное, создать новый мир и переосмыслить, наверное, о том, что мы можем оставить нашим потомкам.
And so I'm here today as a goodwill ambassador of the Atom Project, and I would ask you to go online, to look at the petition, to sign it, to tell people about it, about our site, about what you can do, so we can be living in a new world where we can look differently at things and not have these problems occurring.
И, наверное, вот то, что вы здесь сегодня собрались, и вообще все люди, которые стремятся к этому, вот эти люди мне дают, конечно, силу в дальнейшем бороться. И для меня, наверное, это вот есть миссия. Я хочу добиться того, чтобы я в основном стал последней жертвой в истории всех ядерных испытаний.
And so the fact that you have gathered here tells me that you're the people who give me, like the people who give me strength, the people who let me continue my fight against this. And what I'm trying to reach at the end is to be the last one who have suffered from the radiation, and so we don't have that suffering anymore.
Еще раз вам огромное спасибо. От меня вам лично желаю успехов. И, наверное, мы должны взяться вместе. Пришло время, когда мы должны взяться вместе за руки и перевернуть этот мир в лучшую сторону.
And so I want to thank you. Personally, I would like to wish you all success, and I think that this is probably the time when we can hold each other's hands and change this world and get the success in what we're doing.
Thank you.
Karpek, thank you so much for your powerful testimony, your hard work and your perseverance, and we will succeed in the end in the effort that you just outlined. And before we hear from our final speaker, I wanted to allow the audience, who've been very patient with this program, to have an opportunity to ask a question, make a brief comment of any of our panelists on the wide range of issues that we've just talked about here today. And I would just ask that you identify yourself and wait for the microphone to come by. And before we do that, let me just note that unfortunately Ambassador Tom Pickering will not be able to make it. He was hoping to come, but I just got a message that he has a hand ailment that requires going to the doctor. So it's not life-threatening, but it's something that is keeping him from being here. So we're sorry that he's not with us. And so with that, let me open up the floor and ask for any questions, comments. Yes, right here, Alex.
I'd like to address this to Ambassador Brooks.
The microphone, and the microphone. The microphone. All right.
Alex Leibowitz, retired from the State Department. I think Ambassador Brooks's presentation was very persuasive, but in some sense you could have, I mean, it was less persuasive, whatever it was, 13 years ago, but you could still have made to some extent the same kind of arguments even back then, especially when on the other side we're not really giving up anything since we're not testing anyhow. And so I'm wondering, what can we do? What kind of arguments would really be persuasive in this kind of environment that we face in the United States and in the Senate in particular I mean, it's not directly what your mandate was, but I'm wondering whether, because you've obviously been around this business for a very long time and probably have some insights into this, whether you have any thoughts as to what we can do to gain momentum for ratification in the United States. Thank you.
Well, you're about to hear from a representative of the administration who's much better positioned to answer that. I'll give you an answer with the understanding that this is not the view of the committee or of anybody else. And it's not the view of this administration. Comprehensive test ban will be ratified in the United States when there is a Republican president who supports it. Because then, look back. Look back. New START is the first time since John F. Kennedy that we've ratified anything negotiated by a Democrat. Historically, in the United States, you get all the Democrats because they like arms control, and you get enough Republicans because it's their guy. And when we have that again, I think the treaty will have a shot. It's important to know, and here I can speak for the previous administration, there's not been 5 minutes worth of discussion about resuming nuclear testing in a very long time. If you talk to your friends running the labs, their view is you can do what you want about the CTBT. We've been living under a no testing regime for 20 years and expect to live under it forever. And so I think there's no chance of resumption of testing and no constituency for it. But I, no disrespect to my colleagues in the administration who are trying very hard to deliver on the president's promise, I think in this partisan environment, it is going to take a Republican president to bring this off. I wish that weren't true, but it's probably is.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. I mean, just a couple quick thoughts to the same question. I don't want to pick a fight with Lynn Brooks. You never do because you usually lose. But there was one treaty that was negotiated by a Democratic president that has been ratified, and that was the New START treaty. But that was a different treaty, a different time. It's hard to imagine, but it was a different time. But what I'll say, and I alluded to this at the beginning, is that any treaty ratification effort takes a lot of preparation. That preparation has really not begun on the CTBT in the way the administration did it for New START. And it's time to begin that process. Now, you were asking about the arguments for moving ahead. I mean, one of the key questions is, I think you're alluding to, is why take the trouble to do this in the first place? And the issues that Linton outlined, yes, those were arguments and issues that were there in October of 1999. In my estimation, the report of the National Academy makes it clear that, that was then, this is now. A lot of things have changed from the technical perspective. But, now I think one of the things that is crucially important to consider as we look ahead, not to 2015 or 16, but 5, 10, 15 years down the road is, what do we need to do to create higher barriers for future potential nuclear armed states to develop sophisticated arsenals. And we are looking at North Korea, as was alluded to earlier, that is outside of the test ban regime. They are going to, if nothing else is done, slowly amass a more capable arsenal. So is that kind of problem that we need to be thinking about, and because the United States no longer needs nuclear testing, this is manifestly in our interest and the international security interest. It's that kind of argument that has really not been brought to bear in this debate to date that I think could be very powerful with a Senate that is, it is different in many ways than in 2010 when New START was ratified, very different from 1999. There's less than a quarter of the senators there today who were there in 99. So I'm confident this will be done. Perhaps maybe we should make a wager to see how many presidents from now we're going to be, but perhaps it's going to take a Republican, but I think that the work has to begin now. Any other questions from the crowd here? It's shocking. Okay, very well. Well, with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite our next speaker up. She's going to speak. We'll take some more questions, and then we'll be, I'll make some brief concluding remarks and we'll adjourn. And our next speaker, very honored to have her with us, is Anita Fried. She's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear and Strategic Policy in the Bureau of Arms Control Verification and Compliance. I'm glad I don't have to put that on my business card. I don't think there's enough space. We're glad that she's here. She has been working at the State Department and in the government for 33 years. This is the second time Anita has been at one of our events. She has a wide range of expertise on non-proliferation, New START, and the CTBT. We're very glad you're with us. Why don't you come to the podium, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. As the last speaker of the day, here I am. See, maybe that will help with the number of hard-hitting questions. But thank you very much for the very good introduction, the nice introduction, Daryl. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. It really is wonderful to be back at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and to be speaking along such distinguished leaders as I heard Senator Markey this morning, Ambassador Zumarov, Goodby, and Ambassador Brooks, of course. Now I'm at somewhat of a disadvantage since I wasn't here to hear most of the speeches and the discussion today, but I know I will quickly catch up because, as Daryl says, I have followed this issue, certainly CTBT, and these issues very closely throughout my career, but most especially now. As has certainly been discussed today, it has been 50 years since the Limited Test Ban Treaty entered into force. It was limited in the sense that it did not ban underground nuclear weapon test explosions or any other underground nuclear explosion. But of course, at American University in 1963, President Kennedy called for a complete ban on nuclear explosive testing. The conclusion of such a treaty, President Kennedy said, so near and yet so far, would check the spiraling arms race in one of the most dangerous areas. It would place the nuclear powers in a position to deal more effectively with one of the greatest hazards which man faces in 1963, the further spread of nuclear arms. It would increase our security, and it would decrease the prospects of war. Goal was in sight, and it was clear how we could monitor tests in the water, in space, and on land. There was, however, widespread concern that states would have difficulty in detecting and distinguishing underground nuclear explosions from other naturally occurring events. So without the inclusion of underground tests, the LTBT was a good start, but it wasn't enough. Moving on. So we pressed on. In 1976, a group of scientific experts, the GSE, was established by the Conference on Disarmament to address the issue of effective seismic monitoring of underground nuclear explosions. The work of this GSE helped propel the successful negotiation of a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty in the Conference on Disarmament in the first half of the 1960s. So I won't spend too much time extolling the many virtues of CTBT today, as I certainly know that this is an expert audience, But I will state definitively that a global, verifiable ban on explosive nuclear testing is in the national security interests of the United States of America. The treaty is central to leading nuclear weapons states toward a world of diminished reliance on nuclear weapons and reduced nuclear competition. Furthermore, with a global ban on nuclear explosive tests in place, states interested in pursuing or advancing their nuclear weapons programs would have to either risk deploying weapons with uncertain effectiveness or face international condemnation and possible sanctions for conducting nuclear explosive tests. As you all know, the Senate chose not to give its advice and consent to ratification of CTBT in 1999. For almost a decade, this treaty languished, with some fearing that the United States would withdraw its signature and that it would not be the end of that it would not be possible to have a global ban on nuclear testing. But those fears were not realized, and what we have today, to argue, is a stronger case for ratifying the treaty than ever before. There are two primary reasons for this. First, as I know Ambassador Brooks has talked about, the stockpile stewardship. Stockpile stewardship was at its infancy in 1999. Today, it is a marvel of modern science. From 1945 to 1992, the United States conducted 1,054 nuclear explosive tests, more than any other country. The United States has observed a moratorium on nuclear explosive testing since 1992. So our policies are already consistent with the central prohibition of the treaty. In fact, our scientists at our weapons labs say that they know more now about our arsenal and under the stewardship program than we ever did while we were actually testing. We have proven that we can maintain a safe, secure, and effective arsenal without resorting to explosive testing. And as Ambassador Brooks said in the answer to the question here, I mean, that really is true. I don't think anyone would say that we would go back to testing. Second, the treaty's primary verification mechanism, the International Monitoring System, or the IMS, was not even an infant. It was more a twinkle in the eye of the world's best and brightest scientists. When the treaty was first considered by the Senate, today the IMS is roughly 85% complete, and when fully completed, there will be an IMS facility in 89 countries spanning the globe. At entry into force, the full body of technical data gathered via the IMS will be available to all states parties. And this is really impressive in terms of where we've come with the facilities over the last decade. The system has already demonstrated its capabilities under real-world conditions, detecting and helping states identify 3 nuclear explosive tests conducted by North Korea over the past several years. Following the Fukushima nuclear crisis, we saw how the IMS can be useful for non-verification related purposes, such as tsunami warnings and tracking radioactivity from reactor accidents. Moreover, the United States will always rely on our robust national technical means to provide even greater confidence that we can detect any illicit nuclear explosive tests. Another area of progress in recent years is preparation for the on-site inspections, or OSI, which is another of the treaty's element of the treaty's verification regime. Such inspections would be key to clarifying any ambiguity regarding a possible nuclear test. U.S. experts have been deeply involved in the development of an OSI framework. By contributing our extensive inspection expertise to the development of procedures, manuals, training, testing, exercise planning, and inspection equipment, specifications, the United States has helped build up the CTBTO's capability to conduct robust and effective inspections at entry into force. In addition to the general preparations for the on-site inspection element, the Provisional Technical Secretariat, or the PTS, is in the midst of planning and preparing for the second major integrated field exercise in 2014. This will take place in Jordan. Like the previous integrated field exercise conducted in Kazakhstan in 2008, the 2014 test will test the capabilities of the OSI elements under realistic field conditions. This integrated field test will also test for the first time the integration of various inspection techniques allowed under the treaty in order to provide states parties with the most detailed and robust set of technical data and information on which states could make a judgment of compliance with the treaty. So as taken as a whole, the treaty's robust verification system, which supplements and reinforces the existing U.S. state-of-the-art nuclear monitoring capabilities, will make it extremely difficult for any state to conduct militarily significant explosive nuclear tests with confidence that they will escape detection. So I was just in Vienna a few weeks ago in August at a P5 CTBT technical experts meeting. It was in this environment, which I have to say there were the PhDs far outnumbered politicos such as myself, that P5 experts really got into some interesting technical discussions about the treaty. As nuclear weapons states, the P5 have a unique knowledge in the conduct of nuclear explosive tests. And this knowledge gives us distinct perspectives on what is required to verify a ban on nuclear explosions. It is this sort of collaborative and creative work among technical experts at the PTS that will help to shore up and support the treaty's entry into force. It is for these reasons and more that President Obama expressed his support for the treaty in Prague in 2009 and then reaffirmed that support in Berlin just a few months ago. He pledging to work to build support in the United States for ratification. Whether it is a senator or a staffer, a school teacher or student, we know that it is our job to make the case for this treaty. First and foremost, what we hope to get is a commitment to listen with an open mind. We need to make sure that people are updated with the latest information about CTBT. We know that this agreement involves a very technical set of issues, and we want people to absorb and understand the basics of the treaty and how it benefits us. We have no time frame for Senate action, as discussed here today, and the political situation is dicey here in terms of ratification. And so we will continue to be patient, but we will also be very persistent in our education effort. And as Daryl pointed out, we need to start this campaign. I would argue we have, but we can go into detail with it. We will continue to call on all governments to move forward with ratification and as appropriate declare or reaffirm their commitment not to test. The CTBT is in the security interest of every nation. There is absolutely no reason for any other state whose ratification is required by the treaty for entry into force to wait on the United States. So let me stop here, but I do want to leave you with a thought. 50 years ago, we formally started the process to ban nuclear explosive testing. The reason we will keep pushing, the reason we will keep trying, is that this treaty is good for American national security, and we will continue to make that case to the country. And we certainly will count on your continuing help in this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Why don't you stay here for a moment?
Sure.
And we've got time for a few questions for Anita Frieds. And just before we do, let me amend and revise my remarks as they do in the Senate to say, start in earnest. Start in earnest. Okay.
All right,
so maybe we can. So we've got one more microphone. If you could go over to the other side. Tom Cochran, please. Oh, there we go.
Ambassador Brooks mentioned that seismology was our best method for detecting nuclear tests. And I'm wondering if that's true today or whether signal intelligence is not a better method in light of the revelations about NSA capabilities. And I'm reminded back in the 70s when defense programs used to conduct small secret tests at the Nevada test site. We discovered how to detect them by calling up the test site and asking when the weather briefing was, which always occurred 24 hours before the test. We would pretend we were from the Washington, D.C., and they would tell us the time of the briefing, and we would know that the next day there would be a test. So I think maybe signal intelligence now is a pretty good way for confirming whether the North Koreans are testing?
I certainly agree with you. That's an interesting story. But I certainly agree with you that that national technical means or signals intelligence is an important asset, but the seismic, it remains, so it's got to be both. As I mentioned, national technical means are a priority. I think as everyone sees and knows here, collection efforts, NTM, I mean, and our priorities over the last, certainly since the end of the Cold War, have changed in many ways. I mean, whereas 30, 40 years ago, we have a lot more to look at now, let me just say. I mean, with the threats with Iran, North Korea, elsewhere, there's a lot more for our national technical means to look at. So we really need both.
Lynn, from a technical standpoint, anything to add?
Please.
The National Academy tasking, as we understood it, was direct detection, not knowledge. And as I indicated, the area in which the public report is substantially smaller than the classified report has to do with U.S. so-called national technical means. I mean, take the most obvious case, we detected the North Korean test because the North Koreans announced they just tested. But you can't necessarily depend on that. So I don't, this is not the venue to get into a debate about the relative merits of signal intelligence. We did not cover that because we saw our task as direct detection. But your point's a good point.
Yeah, and as Linton, very good point you've made. Open source is by far, I mean, it's bigger and more important than ever. As you point out, North Koreans announced it, and so you can get a lot from open source.
Rachel?
Hi, because I gotta ask, is there any timeline?
Identify yourself, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Rachel Oswald, Global Security Newswire. Anything you can tell us about a timeline for doing something like naming a coordinator for the ratification campaign effort? Anything about whether the chemical weapons issue before Congress is in any way bringing more concern for WMDs or taking away, scant attention for WMD concerns?
Well, on the latter point, certainly, thanks, those are good questions. On the latter point, no, I mean, it certainly makes clear that these WMD issues are more prominent than ever. There's no question about that. In terms of naming a coordinator or anything like that, as I mentioned, there really are no timelines set. And I think there are good reasons for no timelines set in terms of naming coordinators or doing anything. At least at this point, we just have to see where we are, because politically, we just have to see test the waters and see where we are. So I'll leave it at that. Test the waters, yeah, not the.
All right, any other questions from the floor? The gentleman in the front here, Paul Walker.
Oh, we have.
Microphone's all over the place.
There we go. First of all, thank you, Anita, very much for coming and speaking today. We're very happy to include you in the program. I want to follow up, I guess, on Rachel's question, not about the naming of a coordinator, but the last two major arms control agreements that we've signed and ratified, but had a real struggle to ratify, was the 1997 fight over the Chemical Weapons Convention. And part of doing that under the Clinton administration was to, in fact, name a coordinator out of the White House, in fact, then organize the civil society, NGO, arms control community. And many of us worked every single month. We met at least every 2 to 3 weeks for over a year in coordinating, in fact, the campaign around ratification of the CWC. Similarly, for New START, we had a pretty active campaign around ratification of New START, and it was very uncertain that either treaty at that point would be ratified. And we, as you know, obviously ratified them, sort of by the skin of our teeth in the end. So I'm wondering whether the State Department or the NSC, the White House, has actually begun to reach out to the larger community. I personally know of no effort or campaign effort to bring NGOs, arms control community into the discussion at this point. And that's what a lot of us have, as you know, written State Department and the White House about, that we really feel it's time to begin this. It can be a year, year and a half, 2 years. As you say, no schedule is predictable at this point. But I wonder whether there's been discussion on building a campaign around the CTBT, regardless of the headcount in the Senate at this point.
That's a good point, and thank you very much. I certainly, well, I was front and center in the New START ratification effort, so I know firsthand, and it was, yes, more than dicey, and it was, if it were not for the massive effort and the very welcome help from NGOs and from the community at large, we would not, and the campaign, we would not have ratified the treaty. There's no, the chances it was an uphill battle. The negotiation was quite, in some ways, the negotiation was very tough, but it was almost a cakewalk compared to the ratification. It really was. It was an eye-opener, to say the least, for me and for many others. And after that, I mean, the original plan, when President Obama came into office and gave his famous Prague speech in 2009, was to go for ratification of New START, to negotiate and then ratify New START, and then immediately move on to CTBT. Because of the uphill battle and many other political and other factors, it was clear that we couldn't just keep going, because it just was not, it just didn't make sense. At this point, we certainly welcome your help. I know you're ready and willing and out there, and yes, you will be hearing from us soon. I think it's again, it's a delicate a delicate issue.
But I have a question I wanted to ask Anita Roman to address, which is that there's the international aspect to entry into force. There are other countries that do need to sign and ratify, and coming up on September 27th is the 8th Article 14 Conference on Facilitating Entry into Force of the CTBT, where almost 100 representatives will gather to exhort the CTB holdout states to get going, and there will be NGOs there making some key points too. I was wondering if each of you could offer your thoughts about what some of the other countries around the world can do and why to move forward on CTBT entry into force. And here's one small example I think is quite interesting that hasn't been noted in Washington, is that just about a month and a half ago, at the behest of the new Executive Secretary of the Conference and Test Ban Treaty Provisional Technical Secretariat, Lucina Zerbo, China agreed to transmit the data from their certified IMS stations to the International Data Center in Vienna, which they had not been doing for some time. And so that's a small step forward for China, which has also, like the United States, signed but not yet ratified. But there are other countries that have their part to do. The U.S. is, of course, critical. But I was wondering if you could just address that aspect of the problem. What kind of diplomatic strategy could be organized in order to help that effort, and what do you expect out of this next entry into force conference, which is an opportunity to help pull together a serious multilateral diplomatic strategy for the test ban treaty?
Thank you so much. And I thought it was going to be quick, but it seems like we have a lot to discuss here. I wouldn't be inventing the wheel when I say that there are countries, not just Kazakhstan, but many others, who are trying to chip in and to contribute to the whole discussion and to move the process forward, trying to influence the remaining 8 countries. I would particularly mention Norway, which hosted the Conference on Humanitarian Consequences of Nuclear Weapons Testing in March this year. 135 countries participated, but no P5. That just tells you the challenges of even maintaining the dialogue on this issue. There were India, Pakistan, Iran there, but no P5. The next event that this group of countries is organizing is in Mexico in February 2014, which is just next door to the United States. So I hope that this is this gets more attention from P5. In terms of the next conference on the entry into force, I would just revert back to what I said earlier, that there is obviously a great need in a better and more open dialogue. And once this dialogue is in place, everybody knows what can be done. And there are dozens of specialists from every country who are part of this process. I'm sure that they will be able to find even incremental steps forward to convince the Romanian holdouts to move forward.
Any thoughts on this topic, Anita?
Sure, yeah. No, we're certainly looking forward to the Article 14 conference, well, the week after next. In terms of getting other states to ratify, as I mentioned in my remarks, I mean, the fact that the United States has not ratified should not hold other countries back from ratifying. I thank you for mentioning the Chinese, that they're putting their stations on. That really was a small, but it's arguably also a very large step, and that was an extremely welcome step forward. As I mentioned, I think that the work of the CTBTO in Vienna is really, I've been out there twice now, which is not a lot, and I'm sure many of you have much more experience. It really is an impressive organization which has come so far. The organization has been doing a lot in terms of getting out and trying to get Annex II countries to ratify, and we certainly support those efforts. Other than that, I really am big on supporting the actual organization, and also keeping up monetary support. I mean, the United States has paid all its bills and then some, and I think that's an argument that we have there sometimes, but in terms of contributions to the organization, keeping that organization and building out the organization is really of very high importance and something that we need to continue.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Jennifer, why don't you take the microphone? Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Mackby, and I served as secretary of the group of scientific experts, not back in 1976, but more recently when the treaty was being negotiated, and also served on the negotiations for the treaty, and then in Vienna, and on the verification work. And I was just wondering, just a technical thing, how far along you perceive the OSI manual is, and how close to being finished that is. And the other thing, at this next Article 14 conference, I mean, Sweden and Mexico were the previous outgoing two coordinators on this. They didn't do a whole lot, quite honestly, and I'm wondering if the next two could be prevailed upon by U.S. and the rest of the NGO community to do more.
Support that. In terms of the manual, you really have. I've gotten my I've technically advanced to some point, but not to the point where I know where the manual is. But I know there are other people, including my colleagues here, who can answer that when we finish.
Yeah, just what we're talking about here is the finalization of the manual that will provide the protocols for the on-site inspections, which can only take place when the treaty enters into force, and if there's a challenge inspection authorized by the executive committee. Any other questions from the audience? None? None? Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Ambassador. Here you go.
I just want to comment saying that, because probably it's more theoretical thought, but of course if U.S. will show the leadership in ratifying the treaty, I think the other countries will follow. And why I think so is that China, as you said, has already started the move, and of course they won't do anything without having the U.S. as a superpower just to move in that direction. But if this is be done, I'm sure that China will follow, and India and Pakistan, it's again the pair which is looking at each other, and if one of the countries will follow, the other one also follow the suit. And the position of India, which is actually for equal position for all other countries, especially 5 countries, if they go for the reduction of nuclear weapons, they will join NPT, and they will be just, again, for all of this anti-nuclear movement. So we have here a good situation where if the West shows the leadership, and as we hear today in the panel, that there is no any reasons why U.S. has to kind of stop itself from ratifying the test ban, because verification system is there. Everything technologically, we have all the capabilities to check and verify. So I think that at this point of time, U.S. should show the leadership, and if that is done, then the rest of the countries will follow the suit. Of course, I understand the internal political situation, which does not permit it, but with all of this data, with all of this good information which you have, research and opinions, I think today is more probably in the hands of NGOs who can really galvanize the public opinion and make a bigger push on those in the Congress who really should be accountable to what is going on and what is the opinion of the public on this issue. So I think that probably today we have to start from the other side, from the side of the public opinion, to grow and just provide the conditions for Senate to go ahead and do that. Thank you.
Thank you. One thought about that, if I could actually comment on your remarks, I would say that historically speaking, victory has 1,000 fathers and mothers. It's going to take all of us to make this happen. And if you look throughout the history, prior to 1963, after 1963, just before 1991, there were a combination of people, local leaders, national leaders, legislators, doctors, physicians, ordinary mothers, NGOs, all together. So we're going to have to stitch together a campaign to achieve this. As somebody who's been working this for a long time, I appreciate the support for the NGOs and the recognition of their importance, but we can't do it alone either. So one other thing I would just also mention that is important about the Article 14 conference, the non-governmental organization is going to mention this in our statement, is that there are powerful reasons for some countries in Central Asia, Iran in particular, to take steps towards ratification too. And I know that Kazakhstan has a very good dialogue with Iran, and President Nazarbayev just met recently with Hassan Rouhani, the new Iranian president, and that Iranian ratification could be a useful step in proving that their program is for peaceful purposes. And I say that it reminds me of an incident in 1996 when I was in Geneva lobbying countries for the negotiation of the CTBT, and I was praising the Iranians for a draft treaty that they had just put down for negotiations, and I came back to Washington, and some people criticized me for giving the Iranians praise in 1996, quoted in the Financial Times. But they have played a role, and they can play a helpful role in the future still on this issue. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, I think we're running out of time. I want to thank everyone here for their remarkable contributions. I want to thank in particular Karabek for your inspiring testimony and your hard work. I think everyone here has been moved and motivated to work harder on this. I want to thank Roman and Linton and Anita for your contributions. I think we've had a very diverse and rich discussion. Our thanks to our friends at the Embassy of Kazakhstan for helping make this possible, to Paul Walker and Global Green USA, and everyone here for your attention and your interest. We look forward to seeing you again at some point in the future. And let me just also note that there's a video. There will be a video of this discussion and a transcript for those who want to go back and relive the experience. So thanks, everyone.